Imagine discovering that one of the most revered gods of antiquity, a symbol of beauty, light, and masculine perfection, had male lovers. And that this wasn't a scandal. It was completely natural. We're talking about Apollo, the god of the sun, music, and prophecy. And yes, he had intense and passionate relationships with other men. But here's the detail that will blow your mind. For the Greeks and Romans, this didn't make him gay in the modern sense. Their sexuality worked in a completely different way than ours. Get ready, because today you'll discover how the ancient world viewed love, desire, and the relationships we would now call homosexual, and why trying to fit Apollo into our modern categories is a gigantic historical error. Apollo's male lovers. Let's get straight to the facts. Apollo had several male lovers recorded in Greek and Roman mythology. The most famous? Hyacinthus, a Spartan prince of legendary beauty. According to Ovid, in his Metamorphoses, Apollo fell madly in love with the young man. The two spent days together. Apollo taught Hyacinthus to play the lyre, to shoot a bow, to fight. Their relationship was intimate, intense, and passionate, until one day during a discus game, tragedy struck. Apollo threw the discus with divine force. The wind, some say it was Zephyrus, another god in love with Hyacinth, out of jealousy, deflected the discus, which struck Hyacinthus in the head, killing him instantly. Apollo was devastated. In Ovid's words, the god tried to heal the wound, but not even his powers could bring Hyacinth back. From the young man's blood, Apollo created a flower, the hyacinth, to immortalize his memory. Another lover of Apollo was Cyparissus, a young man who loved a sacred deer. When Cyparissus accidentally killed the animal, he was so devastated that he asked Apollo to weep forever. The god, moved by compassion, transformed him into a cypress, the tree of mourning. These were not isolated cases. Apollo had documented relationships with Admetus, Hymenaeus, Leucades, and others. For the Greeks, this was not a moral scandal. It was mythology. It was part of the multifaceted character of the gods. How the Greeks viewed sexuality. Here's the crucial point. The ancient Greeks didn't think of hetero or homo. These categories were invented in the 19th century. For them, what mattered was not the gender of the partner, but the role you played. In classical Greece, the institution of pederasty existed, the relationship between an adult man, erastes, and an adolescent, eromenos. The historian Plutarch describes how this was part of education in Sparta and Athens. The older man was mentor, protector, teacher. The relationship included affection, admiration, and yes, a sexual component. Plato, in Symposium, has Socrates and other philosophers openly discussing love between men as the highest form of love, because it was based on spiritual and intellectual affinity, not just procreation. What they judged wasn't whether you desired men or women, it was whether you were active or passive. An adult citizen should always be active, dominant. Being passive was seen as submission, a loss of masculinity. This was the real social concern, Apollo and the ideal of masculinity. But wait, if relationships with men were accepted, why did Apollo specifically have so many male lovers? Apollo represented the ideal of kalokagathia, the perfection that combined physical beauty and moral excellence. He was eternally young, athletic, and beardless, unlike Zeus. In Greek art, Apollo appears as the perfect Ephebi, the young man at the height of beauty. For the Greeks, youthful male beauty was the pinnacle of aesthetic attraction. Historian Kenneth Dover, in Greek Homosexuality, documents how gymnasiums and palaestra, where young men trained naked, were spaces where these relationships naturally developed. Apollo embodied this ideal. He was the god who loved and was loved by beautiful young men. This reinforced his status, not diminished it. Pindar, in his odes, celebrated these relationships as noble and elevated. When Rome conquered Greece. When the Romans absorbed Greek culture, they brought with them the myths of Apollo. But there was a crucial difference. Rome was more conservative toward Roman citizens. For the Romans, the rule was clear. A Roman citizen could have relations with whomever he wanted, men, women slaves, as long as he was always active. Julius Caesar was the target of jokes for allegedly being passive with King Nicomedes of Bithynia. Not because he had relations with a man, but because he was penetrated. Even so, Roman poets continued to celebrate Apollo's loves. Ovid, Virgil, Horace, all mention his relationships with men without scandal. It was mythology, it was inherited culture, it was art. The defining moment, the Temple of Delphi. Picture the scene, 4th century BC, Delphi, the most important sanctuary of Apollo. Pilgrims from all over Greece climb the mountain to consult the oracle. In the temple, inscriptions mark the values Apollo represents: know thyself and nothing in excess. Inside the temple, among the offerings, are statues. One of them shows Apollo and Hyacinth together. There is no shame, no scandal. It is sacred art. The priests tell the story of the tragic love between the god and the prince. Young athletes who come to compete in the Pythian Games, the games dedicated to Apollo, hear these stories as examples of noble love. In this moment, in this sacred place, it becomes clear: Apollo's love for Hyacinth is not an embarrassing detail. It is a fundamental part of who he is. It is what makes him human, vulnerable, real, even though he is a god. Why does this bother today? So why is this topic controversial now? Because our society has undergone a radical transformation. Christianity, which became dominant in the Roman Empire, brought a new vision of sexuality based on procreation, chastity, and rigid gender roles. Same-sex relationships, which were natural in the pagan world, became sinful. The stories of Apollo were reinterpreted, censored, or simply ignored. For centuries, Christian translations of classical texts omitted or softened these passages. Only recently, with scholars like Dover, Eva Cantarella, and David Halperin, have we been able to reconstruct how the ancients really thought about sexuality. And the truth is clear: they weren't like us. So was Apollo gay? The honest answer is, that question doesn't make sense in his context. Apollo was a Greek god who loved both men and women, because for the Greeks, this was perfectly natural and even admirable. Trying to force him into our modern categories is like trying to use a ruler to measure temperature. What modern conservatives don't want you to know isn't that Apollo was gay. It's that our entire rigid understanding of sexuality is a recent invention. For millennia, the greatest Western civilizations viewed these issues completely differently. History isn't here to comfort our certainties. It's here to challenge them. Leave a comment. Did you know these stories about Apollo? Which part surprised you the most? And if you want to explore more myths that challenge our modern understanding, you know what to do. Subscribe to the channel, where the story is told unfiltered.